But in terms of thinking about leadership, one of the things that I've done is I wrote a book called Think Like Jesus, Lead Like Moses, Leadership Lessons from the Wilderness Crucible. And so it's based on my time as the head of the Christian Coalition here in the state of Indiana and dealing with things from 1992 to 1995. And one of the things that I've seen going on in terms of leadership is looking at the issue of Moses. You know, if you think about teams and how they get formed, typically teams are formed in a crisis situation. Those teams that are formed in a crisis sort of situation tend to really get things done, as opposed to if you just form a team to do business as usual. Do you remember the Chilean miner about 2010 when they had that mine collapse? I'm not sure how long they were down in the mine, 40, 50 days. There was this one individual, frankly I don't know his name, but he became the leader of that group. He got the miners down in the mine organized. He got them to make sure that they rationed their water, rationed their food. He told stories. He did all sorts of things to keep their morale up. One of the things that you find is that typically the leadership of a team and the ability to do that sometimes is innate in many of us, but leaders are not born, they're made. They're forged in the crucible of conflict. Certainly certain people have better raw materials than others, but all of us have that opportunity, but perhaps we don't get called to it, like that Chilean miner who saw himself called at the right time. Well, when you think about teams, sometimes you've got disparate different groups that come together. Think of the Israelites when they left Egypt. Perhaps you didn't know this, but it wasn't just the Hebrews that left Egypt. There was a group of non-Hebrews that the Bible refers to as the rabble. And so God had to forge them as a team there in the wilderness. And of course, one of the things that he had to do was he had to take Moses and first train him up to become a leader. Now, I don't want to turn this into a Bible study, but one of the things that you might do the next time you have a chance to look at the Exodus story is to look at the development of Moses as a leader, particularly during the time of the 10 plagues and his interaction with Pharaoh. And when you do that, you'll see certain things happen. First of all, there is a change in Moses' perception of himself. And as his perception changes, and Aaron, who starts out being the spokesperson for the two, and then later on it becomes Moses, as Moses' view of himself changes, then Pharaoh's view of his perception of God changes. And once Pharaoh's perception of God changes, then the Egyptian people's perception of the God of the Israelites changes. And once the Egyptians' view of the God of Israel changes, then Moses' own people's view of them changes too. We just had an example of how the view of the Tea Party by the Republican Party is changing. First, you all as leaders had to have a change in your mindset of who you were. And then as that happened, the other side began to say, whoa, who is this person? You know, I thought they were just, you know, Joe Blow or, you know, whatever. And now they're standing up and they're speaking. And as time goes by, the perception of the Tea Party among those who are our opponents changes. And then finally, those that we would think would have been our allies from the very beginning, their viewpoint changes too. There's a pattern in leadership in terms of how things change. One of the things that I really like are movies. I actually have a newsletter called Conversations with the Culture. I write it once a month. I've been doing it for about 6 years, where I take a movie and then I have a Bible devotional that comes off of it. And in fact, in my book, Think Like Jesus, Lead Like Moses, I have various movie scenes to illustrate various principles. And so this evening I'm going to be drawing on some of my favorite movies to illustrate some of the things that I want to say. So, my all-time favorite is It's a Wonderful Life. You all seen it? If anybody has not, you need to watch it at Christmas time. Okay? So you've got Jimmy Stewart, who plays George Bailey. And of course he starts out the movie saying, you know, I'm going to leave this town, I'm going to kick the dust off my feet, I'm getting out of here, I want to go see the world, I'm going to do things my way. But as we all know, George Bailey never ever really leaves Bedford Falls. In fact, he's stuck there until finally he becomes the richest man in town. But you know, George Bailey doesn't do anything by himself. He has a team that he works with. He's got Bert and Ernie, by the way, from Sesame Street. I'm convinced that Bert and Ernie come from It's a Wonderful Life. Sam Wainwright, Mr. Gowker, Mr. Martini, and others. And so this team spirit is formed during a crisis, during the Great Depression. And there is one particular scene that I think epitomizes this whole how we come together in a crisis. Remember when George and Mary are getting married and they're about to go off on their honeymoon and finally see the world, and then they see a run on the bank and a run on Bailey's Savings and Loan. And so George goes back, discovers that Uncle Billy has locked the door, he lets everybody in, they all go inside, and they begin to say, well, you know, Mr. Powder, he's offered to pay 50 cents on the dollar for our shares if we just go over to the bank. And George runs in front of them, everybody gets in front of them at the door and says, we can make this, we can make it through this. We've got to stick together. You know, Potter's not panicky. He's buying. Why? Because we're scared and we're not. Now, we just got to stick together. We've got to have faith in each other. That's the key thing. We have to have faith in each other. And in the 2012 election cycle and the economic problems that we all face, we must have faith in each other. You know, there's a lot of power in cooperative effort when people come together. As long as there's a sense of fairness and justice, without a sense of fairness and justice, no leader can command and retain the respect of his followers. The leader who tries to impress people with his title and with his authority will never achieve buy-in to the thing that he wants to accomplish. In the movie It's a Wonderful Life, that's Mr. Potter's problem. He thinks he can buy anybody. You remember the scene where he basically calls George in and he offers him a job. And George thinks, wow, this is great. I'll have more money, I can travel, I can buy nice things for my wife. Who wouldn't want to do that? But then he realizes there's a trade-off. If he takes the money, he must give up his ideals. He must give up his personal freedom. He could take the money, but he doesn't. Mr. Potter doesn't care about George Bailey. He sees George Bailey as a threat and he wants to buy him off. George Bailey chooses ideals and values over money. You all seen the movie Braveheart? Yeah. Another great scene where Robert the Bruce is talking to his father. His father basically wants to make sure that the family keeps land and titles and everything, and he convinces his son, Robert the Bruce, to betray William Wallace, which he does. Afterward, Robert the Bruce is speaking to his father. His father said, you know, you got the title, you got the lands, you've increased your lands, you've increased your wealth, you've got everything you want. And Robert the Bruce says, everything? I have nothing. I went for the money, but the people follow William Wallace because they love him and they care about him. He stands for something. I stand for nothing. You know why people follow me? Because if they don't follow me, I kick them off their lands and I starve their families. I went for the money and not the ideals. I have nothing. I will never do that again. That's the promise that Robert Bruce makes in the movie. You know, Jesus said, to be a leader, you must be the servant of all. Leaders need certain things from their followers, and followers need certain things from their leaders. Followers want leaders who will fight for them and go into the places where they are not able to go. I learned that in my time as the head of the Christian Coalition back in 1992. I had gotten a call from a woman by the name of Connie in West Lafayette. This was the first city in the state of Indiana where a gay rights ordinance was being offered. And she had just found out about it. She ran a daycare out of her mobile home. She found out I was the head of the Christian Coalition, and we had just gotten started in the state at that time. And so she called me up and she says, I need help. And so I went out there and worked with her, and a lot of things happened. She was a marvelous young lady, and she allowed me to coach her and so forth. At one point, I had a chance to speak as part of a forum that she had put together. She put it at a place called Jinx Rest. They had the news media from Lafayette. They were going to bus in students from Purdue University in favor of the other side. The problem was I was basically going bankrupt. Have any of you ever said to yourselves, you know, it's just not worth it doing this leadership thing. I do all the work. There's nobody around to help. Everybody says they will, but they never show up. Why don't I just quit? Anybody been there? Be honest. In 1992, during all of this, I sent a letter off to Ralph Reed and I said, you know, I can't handle it. The guy who had promised to finance me went bankrupt. I never saw the money that he promised me, and I was going bankrupt. And so when Connie called me and we were working through these things, by the way, I never actually did quit. You'll just have to read the book to find out how that all works out. But I had basically decided to go to work to support my family. I did work as a lobbyist, and I was going to be lobbying starting the next day for companies like Inland Steel and groups like that. And as I drove to West Lafayette, I was thinking about, okay, so if my boss finds out what I'm talking about and so forth with all the news media, I could lose my job. But I realized that while I was there and speaking in front of that audience, that the folks that were there on behalf of our side drew courage from me. They needed me to speak out because I had a position and a sense of authority, and I could go someplace that they could not go. They needed me to speak for them. And that is a lesson that I have always remembered, that no matter what's going on, the safest place to be is in the eye of the storm.